In May 1943, a bomb that skipped across water like a flat stone breached 2 German dams in a single night. But the raid's real legacy wasn't the floods. It was a physics bet that nearly killed its own crews first. The target was the industrial heart of the Ruhr Valley, and the mission was codenamed Operation Chastise. The man behind the impossible weapon was a British engineer named Barnes Wallis. Wallis had spent years trying to convince the Air Ministry that one giant bomb could end the war faster. His real breakthrough came when he realized that torpedo nets protected German dams from conventional attack. So he designed a bomb that would skip over those nets and strike the dam wall directly at water level. The physics relied on backspin, the same principle that makes a cricket ball or a golf ball curve in flight. Spun backward at 500 revolutions per minute, the bomb would bounce across the water's surface. To work, it had to be released from exactly 60 feet above the water, at exactly 232 miles per hour. 60 feet is barely 8 feet above a 4-story building, and the crews had to hold that height at night. Measuring that height at night was so hard that the crews built special spotlights into the bomber's undersides. When the 2 light beams merged into one on the water, the aircraft was at exactly the right height to release. But first, the crews had to learn to fly at rooftop level across the English countryside in pitch darkness. The training squadron lost aircraft in crashes before the raid even began, a warning of what lay ahead. By the spring of 1943, the crews of 617 Squadron were ready, and their target list was set. The target list named 3 dams, but the Möhne was the crown jewel of the entire operation. The Möhne held back a reservoir that supplied drinking water and power to much of the Ruhr region. Wallis estimated that a single breached dam could unleash a flood wave that would devastate factories downstream. But the engineering reality was far more fragile than the theory suggested on paper. The bomb had to strike the dam wall at the precise moment of its final bounce to do any damage at all. Each aircraft flew its attack run one at a time, straight into the teeth of heavy anti-aircraft fire. On the night of the 16th of May, 19 Lancasters lifted off from Scampton Airfield in eastern England. They flew a long route across the North Sea and over the Netherlands to approach from an unexpected direction. The crews hugged the ground at treetop height to stay hidden from German radar until the last moment. Tragically, the very first aircraft was shot down by German coastal defenses before it ever reached its target. Others were forced to turn back when their aircraft struck power lines or clipped the tops of trees. By the time the surviving aircraft reached the Möhne, only a handful was still in position to attack. The attack run demanded perfect composure because each pass meant flying straight and level into the flak. The first crews released their bombs, but the dam held firm against the early attempts. Then one bomb struck the wall at the perfect height, and the concrete began to crack under the pressure. Within minutes, the entire Möhne Dam gave way, unleashing a torrent of water down into the valley below. The flood wave from the Möhne swept down the valley at speed, carrying debris and water toward the towns below. The water struck the town of Neheim-Houston, where flood defenses were overwhelmed within minutes of the breach. The official British estimate put the civilian losses in the Ruhr floods at more than 1,200 people. These were not soldiers in combat, but men, women, and children caught in the path of an engineered catastrophe. The raid's planners had hoped the flooding would cripple the Ruhr's war production for months, not days. But the German water supply and power system proved far more resilient than the planners had calculated. Within roughly 2 weeks, the Ruhr's water and power supply had largely been restored to working order. The much-feared collapse of Ruhr war production never fully materialized as the planners had hoped. Yet the raid had already achieved something else, a sudden, powerful blow to German morale and confidence. German authorities were forced to divert thousands of workers and scarce materials to rebuild the broken dams. Those resources had to come from somewhere, and they were drawn away from other war-critical projects. The Möhne Dam, breached later that same night, added a second flood wave that compounded the disruption. The Möhne's flood reached the town of Kassel and the Weser River, spreading the damage across a wider region. Of the 19 aircraft that took off that night, 8 never returned to their base in England. 53 airmen were lost in the raid, a price that weighed heavily on the surviving crews and their commander. The cost was roughly 1/3 of the attacking force, a staggering loss for a single night's operation. The losses stunned Bomber Command, but the crews who survived were already being hailed as heroes across Britain. Within days, the story of the Dambusters was being told in newspapers and newsreels across the Allied world. But what the public was told about the raid's success was considerably more optimistic than the operational reality. The mission was celebrated as a triumph of British ingenuity, and its leader was awarded the Victoria Cross. Wing Commander Guy Gibson, who led the raid, became one of the most decorated and famous airmen of the war. Yet the most important legacy of Operation Chastise was not the medals, but the lessons it forced on both sides. The Germans, for their part, immediately began reinforcing every major dam across the Reich against similar attacks. They installed torpedo nets and heavy anti-aircraft batteries around the most valuable dams in the industrial regions. The British, meanwhile, drew a different conclusion, one that would shape the rest of the bombing campaign. The raid proved that precision attacks on a few critical points could achieve more than area bombing ever had. This thinking directly influenced the development of the Grand Slam and tall-by deep penetration bombs later in the war. Barnes Wallis himself went on to design the Tallby, a 12,000-pound bomb used to sink a German battleship. The Tirpitz, the pride of the German Navy, was eventually sunk by tall-by bombs in November of 1944. So the bouncing bomb was not a one-off stunt, but the first step toward a whole family of precision weapons. And the strategic debate the raid ignited about precision versus area bombing would echo through the rest of the war. To understand what Operation Chastise truly achieved, we must weigh its immediate damage against its long-term cost. To weigh that legacy honestly, we first have to measure exactly what the floods actually destroyed. The Möhne and Möhne dams together released more than 160 million tons of water into the Ruhr Valley. That single surge of water is roughly comparable to filling a small lake and draining it in a matter of hours. The flood wave swept downstream at speed, overwhelming villages, bridges, and roads that lay in its path. Beyond the human cost, the water knocked out power stations, pumping plants, and canal locks across the region. German industry depended on those dams for both drinking water and the cooling water its factories needed. In the days after the raid, steel production in the Ruhr dropped sharply as plants lost their water supply. One German assessment calculated that the Ruhr lost well over 1 million tons of steel production in that period. That sounds like a crippling blow, but the German war economy was far more flexible than the planners assumed. Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister, later admitted the raid was a serious blow to production. Yet Speer also noted that the German response to the damage was swift and remarkably effective. Within months, the Möhne dams were largely rebuilt and again holding water for the Ruhr. So the immediate industrial damage, while real, was eventually absorbed by the German war machine. This is why many military historians now judge the raid's direct effect on the war as limited. But to end the story, there would be to miss the raid's true and lasting significance. For what Operation Chastise really changed was not the Ruhr, but the entire direction of Allied bombing strategy. To see how the raid redirected Allied strategy, we must follow the debate inside the British Air Ministry after May 1943. The success of the bouncing bomb gave new credibility to the idea of attacking a few precise targets instead of whole cities. That argument eventually led to a dedicated unit formed to strike precision targets with special weapons. That unit was number 617 Squadron, the same squadron that had flown Operation Chastise under Guy Gibson. In late 1943, the squadron was re-equipped to carry Wallis's new torpedo bomb against hardened targets. The torpedo was a 12,000-pound bomb designed to penetrate deep underground before detonating. Its first major test came in June 1944, when the squadron attacked a secret German weapons site in occupied France. The target was a heavily fortified concrete structure at a place called Mimiex, built to house long-range guns. Torpedo bombs struck the bunker and collapsed its gun shafts, effectively neutralizing the threat of those weapons. This was exactly the kind of point target that area bombing could never have reached with enough precision. Later that same year, the squadron used torpedo bombs against a far more famous target at sea. That target was the German battleship Tirpitz, which had spent years lurking in Norwegian fjords as a threat to convoys. In November of 1944, torpedo bombs finally capsized the Tirpitz in Tromsø Fjord, ending its menace for good. So the bouncing bomb was the seed of a precision bombing philosophy that would outlast the war itself. By the end of the war, the Allies had accepted that hitting the right target mattered as much as dropping many bombs. And that shift in thinking, born on a moonlit night over the Ruhr, would quietly shape air power for decades to come. Yet that quiet revolution in bombing thinking took years to mature into the doctrine we know today. As the war progressed, precision attacks against bridges, railways, and factories became the new standard. The United States Army Air Forces had championed daylight precision bombing from the very beginning of the war. But the Dambusters raid gave the British their own proof that accurate strikes on the right target could work. In the final year of the war, both air forces increasingly cooperated on joint precision strikes against strategic targets. One of the most striking examples came in early 1945 with the destruction of a massive German railway viaduct. On the 14th of March 1945, a new 10-ton bomb called the Grand Slam collapsed the viaduct's massive piers. That single weapon was the largest conventional bomb used by any air force during World War II. The Grand Slam was the direct descendant of the same design philosophy that had produced the bouncing bomb. Both weapons came from the same engineer, Barnes Wallis, who had never stopped refining his ideas about precision attack. So the path from the bouncing bomb to the Grand Slam shows a single thread running through the entire war. After the war, the lessons of Chastise were studied by air forces around the world, from the United States to the Soviet Union. The idea that a few well-placed weapons could destroy a target that thousands of bombs could not became central to air power. That principle would eventually lead to guided bombs and precision-guided munitions in the decades that followed. Modern militaries now take for granted the ability to hit a single building from miles away with one weapon. But all of that began with a desperate bet on a spinning drum of steel skipping across a moonlit lake in 1943. To understand just how far that idea traveled, we have to look at what happened in the months right after the raid. The British government, eager for a propaganda victory, released news of the raid within days of the mission. The raid was presented as a stunning success, and the crews were celebrated as heroes across the Commonwealth. But the German response to the breached dams was faster and more effective than the British had expected. Within weeks, an army of forced laborers and engineers had patched the Möhne Dam enough to refill its reservoir. By late September of 1943, the dam was fully repaired and holding water again, erasing much of the raid's effect. This rapid reconstruction is the part of the story that the popular myth tends to leave out. Historians now assess that the industrial disruption from the floods lasted roughly 2 months at most. The German Armaments Ministry redirected labor and resources and recovered production far sooner than planned. So the strategic damage to the Ruhr was real but temporary, not the war-ending blow that some headlines claimed. But the raid did have one consequence that proved far more lasting than the floods themselves. That consequence was a change in how Bomber Command thought about targets and about the weapons needed to hit them. The raid proved that a small, highly trained force could destroy a target that area bombing could not touch. And it gave the British a powerful demonstration that precision, not just weight of bombs, could decide a mission. That demonstration, more than any flood, is what made the Dambusters raid a turning point in the history of air power. So the real legacy of May 1943 was not the water that flooded the Ruhr, but the idea that flew through the night with those crews. But to fully understand that legacy, we have to examine the human cost that the propaganda headlines rarely mentioned. Of the 133 airmen who flew on Operation Chastise, 53 did not return from the mission. That casualty rate of roughly 40% was among the highest suffered by any bomber squadron in the entire war. 8 of the 19 Lancasters that took off that night were lost, shot down by flak, or struck the water in the dark. The low-level flying demanded by the mission left almost no margin for error, and several crews paid for that with their lives. One of the most famous losses was the aircraft of Flight Lieutenant Guy Gibson's deputy, who was lost on the way home. The Germans also counted their own casualties from the floodwaters that swept down the Möhne and Eder valleys. Historical estimates place the number of people killed by the flooding, including forced laborers, at well over 1,000. Many of those who died were prisoners of war and displaced workers, a detail that complicates the heroic narrative. The official British reports of the time did not dwell on these civilian losses in the valley below the dams. Modern historians have worked to recover the stories of these victims from local German records and church registers. This careful accounting matters because it reminds us that every strategic decision carried a human price on both sides. Yet even as the floods receded, the technical achievement itself continued to draw serious study from military engineers. The physics of the bouncing bomb, the spinning backspin that kept it skipping, was analyzed and refined for decades. That same principle of a weapon skipping along a surface would later find echoes in modern sea-skimming missiles. So the science of Chastise outlived the raid itself, quietly influencing weapons design well into the Cold War. To understand how deeply Chastise shaped the future, we need to follow what happened in the years that followed. The Air Ministry, impressed by the raid, poured enormous resources into developing ever larger and more powerful bombs. Barnes Wallis himself went on to design the Torpedo and Grand Slam bombs, weapons of extraordinary penetrating power. These earthquake bombs, as they were called, were designed to penetrate deep before exploding and shake a structure apart. The Torpedo weighed about 12,000 pounds and could be dropped with remarkable accuracy from high altitude. It was used to sink the German battleship Tirpitz, a feat that conventional torpedoes had repeatedly failed to achieve. The Grand Slam, at nearly 22,000 pounds, was the largest bomb used by any air force during the war. These weapons could destroy viaducts, bunkers, and submarine pens that area bombing had left untouched. So the technical lineage of Chastise ran directly into the precision bombing campaigns of the final years of the war. But the raid also influenced thinking far beyond the British Isles, especially in the United States. American air planners studied the raid closely as proof that a small force could strike a vital target with surgical effect. That same logic would later shape the development of precision-guided munitions in the decades after the war. Yet the most immediate lesson the raid taught was about the limits of even the most brilliant engineering. The Germans rebuilt the dams exactly as they had rebuilt so much else within a matter of months. This taught the Allies that a single blow, however brilliant, could not win a war by itself. Victory would come from the cumulative weight of many campaigns, not from any single dramatic act. The dams were rebuilt, but the Ruhr's industrial recovery was slower and far more costly than the Germans admitted. The floodwaters had destroyed power stations, bridges, and canal locks that fed the entire valley's factories. German records show that coal production in the region fell sharply for weeks after the raid. Yet the strategic impact was smaller than the British public was led to believe at the time. The German armaments minister, Albert Speer, later admitted the raid caused a real but temporary setback. He estimated that the flooding set back steel production by the equivalent of roughly 2 months of output. In the long run, however, the Germans compensated with repairs and by shifting production to other sites. So the raid's true value lay not in crippling the Ruhr, but in forcing the Germans to divert resources to defense. Thousands of troops, searchlights, and anti-aircraft guns were pulled from other duties to guard every major dam. One German assessment noted that defending the dams cost far more than the damage the bombs had caused. This is a classic example of a strategic raid that worked by forcing the enemy to spend more than it saved. Military historians now describe the raid as a triumph of morale and engineering as much as of destruction. For the British public, the raid was a desperately needed victory after years of grim news from the war. The raid also proved that a small, highly trained force could achieve what mass bombing could not. That lesson about precision over mass would echo through every major air campaign of the rest of the century. And yet, the raid's most enduring lesson may be about the courage of the crews who flew so low and so far. Those crews flew their Lancasters at barely 60 feet above the water, below the level of the dam walls themselves. At that height, a single lapse in concentration meant the aircraft would strike the water and be gone in an instant. The crews had trained for weeks at these altitudes, flying over reservoirs in England to master the technique. To judge their height, they used two spotlights mounted on the belly, angled so their beams met on the water. When the two beams merged into one, the pilot knew the aircraft was at the correct height to release the weapon. But the bouncing bomb itself had to spin backward at 500 revolutions per minute to work at all. That backspin was driven by a belt connected to a small motor, which had to be engaged at just the right moment. The bomb was released from a sling beneath the fuselage, its spin already at full speed as it struck the water. The weapon was set to detonate at a depth of 30 feet, just below the dam's waterline where the structure was weakest. The water pressure at that depth multiplied the blast, driving a shockwave straight into the dam's masonry. This was the principle Wallis had worked out on paper years before anyone believed it could actually be done. The first test drops over the sea had been failures, with bombs shattering on impact with the waves. Wallis refined the design until the bombs skipped reliably, and the theory finally matched the reality. Yet even with the weapon perfected, the raid nearly failed before a single bomb was dropped. On the approach to Germany, several aircraft were lost to flak and to collisions with power lines and terrain. Of the 19 aircraft that set out, 8 would never return to their bases in England. The losses were devastating, but the surviving crews pushed on toward their primary targets. The first wave reached the Möhne Dam, the largest and most heavily defended of the targets. Guy Gibson, the raid's commander, flew his own aircraft in first to draw the anti-aircraft fire. His diversion worked, and the next aircraft released its bomb in a perfect low-level run. The bomb skipped across the reservoir and struck the dam, but the first attempt failed to break it. A second and then a third bomb were dropped, each striking the same section of the wall. On the third direct hit, the Möhne Dam finally gave way with a massive breach in its wall. The torrent poured down the valley, and the crews radioed the news back to base in England. With the primary target destroyed, the remaining aircraft turned toward the secondary target, the Möhne Dam. The Möhne Dam sat in a steep valley that made the approach far more difficult than at the Möhne. Crews had to pull up sharply over the surrounding hills and dive down to the water's surface. The first 2 attempts at the Möhne were aborted because the crews misjudged their altitude. The third aircraft, flown by a pilot named Henry Maudslay, released its bomb on a difficult run. The bomb struck the dam's crest, and the aircraft was damaged in the blast, forcing it to turn for home. Maudslay's aircraft would not make it back to England, lost somewhere over the return route. But the next aircraft, flown by Shannon, finally placed a bomb precisely at the base of the wall. Shannon's bomb skipped across the Möhne reservoir and detonated precisely at the base of the wall. The Möhne Dam had been struck by the final bomb of the raid's second wave. The wall cracked, and within minutes, the Möhne Dam collapsed into the valley below. The flood from the Möhne poured into the Fulda River and then into the Weser beyond. In total, the raid breached both major dams and inflicted a third, smaller breach as well. The third, smaller breach was on the Sorpe Dam, which had been struck but not destroyed. The floodwaters raced down the Ruhr Valley, destroying bridges, roads, and entire villages in their path. German industry lost vital water supplies, and the flow of the Ruhr's rivers was interrupted for weeks. The floods also drowned thousands of people, including many forced laborers in the valley below. The human cost of the raid remains a sobering part of its history, often overlooked in the heroic retelling. Back in England, the surviving crews returned to a hero's welcome and a barrage of publicity. The raid was hailed as a stunning success, and the crews were decorated for their courage. Guy Gibson was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest British decoration for valor in combat. Yet the strategic reality was far more complicated than the triumphant headlines suggested. German engineers moved with remarkable speed, and the dams were repaired within months. The Ruhr's water supply was restored by autumn, and German industry largely recovered its output. By the end of the year, the Möhne Dam had been rebuilt and was holding water once again. The German repair effort drew on thousands of laborers and vast quantities of concrete and steel. The speed of that repair revealed a hard truth about how resilient modern industrial systems could be. Historians now estimate that the raid set back German steel production by only a few weeks, not months. The flooding had destroyed homes, railways, and factories, but the economic blow was far smaller than hoped. In fact, some German planners admitted the raid actually galvanized the workforce to rebuild even faster. The raid's true strategic value lay not in the floods, but in what it forced the Germans to defend. The Germans diverted scarce anti-aircraft guns, searchlights, and troops to protect dozens of dams across the Reich. That defensive effort consumed men and material that could not be used against the advancing Allied armies. Perhaps the raid's most lasting effect was psychological, striking at German morale in the industrial heartland. The British propaganda machine celebrated the raid as proof that precision attacks could win the war. But the raid's real legacy for the Royal Air Force was a revolution in how bombs were designed and aimed. The spinning bomb proved that a precisely placed weapon could achieve what mass bombing could not. Wallis's ideas would later evolve into the massive Tollbay and Grand Slam earthquake bombs of 1944. Those weapons would go on to destroy hardened targets that conventional bombs simply could not crack. For the men who flew that night, the cost was severe, with more than half of the attacking force lost. Of the 133 airmen who flew that night, 53 never returned to base. The raid cost more lives than it saved, a hard arithmetic that haunted its planners for years. Yet the raid's example shaped every strategic bombing campaign that followed in the war. The British public, fed on triumphant headlines, saw only the courage and the glory. Historians, though, came to see the raid as a lesson in the limits of even the boldest technology. The bouncing bomb itself was a masterpiece of engineering, but its targets proved far more durable than predicted. In the years after the war, the raid was retold so often that fact and myth became difficult to separate. Films and books turned the Dambusters into heroes, while quietly leaving out the raid's uncomfortable truths. One of those truths was that the raid's planners had underestimated how quickly the Germans could rebuild. The German recovery demonstrated that modern industrial warfare could absorb even spectacular single blows. So what was the raid actually worth in the long arc of the war in Europe? Post-war analysis by the British Air Ministry judged the economic damage to be modest at best. Yet the raid succeeded in something subtler, forcing the Germans to defend their entire water infrastructure. That defensive burden, spread across dozens of dams, drained resources from the front lines for the rest of the war. In that sense, the Dambusters raid was less a knockout punch than a long, slow drain on German strength. And its deepest legacy would be measured not in flooded valleys, but in the bombs and tactics of the years ahead. In the decades that followed, the bouncing bomb itself became a museum piece, preserved as a symbol of ingenuity. The surviving examples of the upkeep bomb now rest in collections across Britain, carefully conserved for study. But the true legacy of that night lay in how it transformed the entire philosophy of aerial bombing. The raid proved that a small force with the right weapon could strike a vital target with surgical precision. That idea would reach its fullest expression in the Torbay and Grand Slam bombs of 1944. These enormous weapons, dropped from high altitude, could penetrate deep beneath the ground before exploding. In November 1944, Torbay sank the German battleship Tirpitz in a Norwegian fjord. That single strike removed a constant naval threat that had tied down Allied warships for years. Wallis's earthquake bombs also destroyed hardened U-boat pens and massive railway viaducts. Each of these successes traced a direct line back to the spinning bomb tested over the Derwent Reservoir. Even after the war, engineers studied the raid's techniques to refine the art of precision attack. The principle of matching a specific weapon to a specific target became the foundation of modern air power. Today's precision-guided munitions carry the same DNA that Wallis's bouncing bomb introduced in 1943. The raid also left a permanent mark on how nations plan for the defense of critical infrastructure. Engineers now routinely design dams and power stations to survive attacks that would have seemed impossible in 1943. So the Dambusters raid, for all its myth and tragedy, quietly reshaped the entire course of modern warfare. To understand that transformation, we need to follow the bouncing bomb's descendants through the rest of the war. Wallis's work on the bouncing bomb had also revealed a second, even more ambitious idea to him. He realized that a bomb detonating deep underground could send shockwaves through the earth itself. Such an earthquake effect could collapse a dam or bridge, even if the bomb never touched it directly. The result was the Torbay, a 12,000-pound bomb that entered service in the summer of 1944. Delivered from high altitude, the Torbay reached supersonic speed as it fell toward its target. That speed let it bury itself deep in the ground before its massive charge detonated. The Torbay's most celebrated success came against the German battleship Tirpitz in November 1944. A direct hit and several near misses rolled the great ship over in the waters of Tromsø Fjord. That single strike ended a threat that had forced the Royal Navy to keep warships tied down elsewhere. Wallis then scaled the concept up further with the Grand Slam, a 22,000-pound earthquake bomb. So heavy was it that only the specially modified Lancaster bomber could carry a single example. In March 1945, Grand Slams destroyed the massive Bielefeld railway viaduct in a single raid. The viaduct had resisted repeated conventional bombing, but the earthquake effect broke it in one stroke. These weapons proved that the precision idea born over the Derwent Reservoir had grown into a decisive force. And that lineage, from a skipping bomb to an earthquake weapon, would shape air power for generations to come. So when we measure the Dambusters raid honestly, we have to weigh the floods against the losses of that night. 53 of the 133 airmen who flew on Operation Chastise did not return. That is a casualty rate of roughly 40%, among the highest of any single operation in the war. And we must also remember the human cost on the ground, where the floodwaters claimed civilian lives in the valley. Historians have estimated that roughly 1,600 people died in the flood that followed the breaches. The raid's own intelligence estimated German industrial output recovered within weeks, not months as hoped. So by the narrow measure of crippling German war production, the raid was only a partial success. But measured by its effect on German morale and on Allied confidence, its impact was far greater than the statistics suggest. The German leadership was forced to divert thousands of workers and vast resources to repair the dams. That diversion of men and material was itself a strategic cost that the German war economy could ill afford. In the end, Operation Chastise's true monument is not a single dam, but a revolution in how wars are fought from the air. If you want to understand how a skipping stone changed the course of modern warfare, subscribe and join us for the next Forgotten Front.